The United States was at war. Its citizens flooded the recruiting stations to volunteer to defend their country.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war on the Empire of Japan. And the following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt told the nation to prepare to make the sacrifices necessary for the coming fight. The U.S. government realized that to win this total war, women would be needed to serve on the home front to free men to fight on the battlefront. Patriotism was running high, and American women heard the call of duty loud and clear and answered. Even before the war, early in 1941, Congresswoman Edith Norris Rogers of Massachusetts met with the Army's Chief of Staff, General George C. Marshall, and informed him that she intended to introduce a bill to establish an Army Women's Corps, separate and distinct from the existing Army Nurse Corps. Although Rogers believed that a women's corps should be a part of the Army so that women could receive equal pay, pensions, and disability benefits, the Army did not want to accept women directly into its ranks. It took over a year of wrangling and compromise before the bill was passed by Congress, authorizing the formation of a women's-only branch of the Army. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or WAC, was created on May 15, 1942. The name was changed on July 3, 1943, to the Women's Army Corps, or WAC. It was established to work with the Army for the purpose of making available to the national defense the knowledge, skill, and special training of the women of the nation. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall declared, "Aside from urgent family obligations, enlistment in the military services takes precedence over any other responsibility. I am confident that American women will answer this call to duty." And answer they did. Societal mores were changing in the 1940s as women in military uniform became a new norm, although social protocols and gender stereotypes persisted. The day after the WAC was established, a St. Louis Globe-Democrat article, "Meet the Boss of the Women's Army Corps," reported on the WAC's first director, Oveta Culp Hobby, who was then chief of the Women's Interest Section in the Public Relations Bureau at the War Department.
It takes brains to be a bank director. She is on the board of the Claiborne, Texas, National Bank. But she does like those flower and veil creations that prompt men to say, "Do you call that a hat?" She dresses smartly and in good taste. Her dark eyes are especially large and alert. They are accentuated by her dark hair, which is turning gray prematurely. Summer and winter, she somehow manages to have that well-tanned look. Enlistments among women grew quickly. By war's end, the WAC would number over 150,000, with 17,000 women serving in Europe and the Pacific, and 2,000 in North Africa. Their assignments were incredibly varied. They worked at airfields as radio operators and spotters, and in ammunition and artillery as crew chiefs and technical workers. They served as drivers and mechanics, telephone and telegraph operators.
I'm the girl that makes the thing that holds the oil, that oils the spring, that takes the shank, that moves the crane.
Aerial photo interpreters and armorers, weather observers and parachute riggers, mail sorters and mechanics, and secretaries and censorers of GI's letters. Over 400 worked at the laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was developed. The list of jobs, everything except combat, was almost endless. Some of the jobs for many were also boring and required long hours, sometimes under dangerous conditions. Strict military restrictions and regulations needed to be followed, and personal freedoms were limited. Some women hated group living, or having to dress like everyone else, or having their social contacts limited. Many realized that they were being paid less than if they were working in private industry. But it is safe to say that the majority gladly made these personal sacrifices for the good of the country. In her Center for Military History booklet, The Women's Army Corps, a commemoration of World War II service, Judith A. Belafare wrote, "WACs in the Southwest Pacific area had a highly restricted lifestyle. Fearing incidents between the women and the large number of male troops in the area, some of whom had not seen an American woman for 18 months. The theater headquarters directed that WACs be locked within barbed wire compounds at all times, except when escorted by armed guards to work or to some approved recreation. No leaves or passes were allowed.
The women chafed under these restrictions, believing they were being treated like children or criminals. Male soldiers complained frequently in their letters home that WACs were not successfully releasing men for combat in the Southwest Pacific because it took so many GIs to guard them. The WACs, in their turn, resented the guards, believing them unnecessary and insulting. 10 women received the Soldier's Medal for heroic actions not involving combat. One such incident occurred at Port Moresby, New Guinea, when an oil stove in the women's barracks caught fire and 3 WACs brought the fire under control by smothering it, sustaining severe burns in the process. 16 women received the Purple Heart. The majority of the WACs received their injuries from exploding V1 bombs while stationed in London. The Bronze Star was awarded to 565 women for meritorious service overseas. A total of 657 WACs received medals and citations at the end of the war. Although women had served in military conflicts since the American Revolution, World War II was the first time that women had taken part in the United States military in an official capacity. In addition to the WAAC, 3 other auxiliaries were formed in 1942. Women accepted for volunteer emergency service, WAVES, the Coast Guard Women's Reserve, SPAR, taken from the Coast Guard's motto Semper Paratus in its translation, Always Ready, and the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, WR. The women chafed under these restrictions, believing they were being treated like children or criminals. Male soldiers complained frequently in their letters home that WACs were not successfully releasing men for combat in the Southwest Pacific because it took so many GIs to guard them. The WACs, in their turn, resented the guards, believing them unnecessary and insulting. 10 women received the Soldier's Medal for heroic actions not involving combat. One such incident occurred at Port Moresby, New Guinea, when an oil stove in the women's barracks caught fire and 3 WACs brought the fire under control by smothering it, sustaining severe burns in the process. 16 women received the Purple Heart. The majority of the WACs received their injuries from exploding V1 bombs while stationed in London. The Bronze Star was awarded to 565 women for meritorious service overseas. A total of 657 WACs received medals and citations at the end of the war. Although women had served in military conflicts since the American Revolution, World War II was the first time that women had taken part in the United States military in an official capacity. In addition to the WAAC, 3 other auxiliaries were formed in 1942. Women accepted for volunteer emergency service, WAVES, the Coast Guard Women's Reserve, SPAR, taken from the Coast Guard's motto Semper Paratus in its translation, Always Ready, and the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, WR.
The WACs, WAVES, SPARs, and WRs weren't the first women to offer their services to the military. Nurses were. One historian noted, for nearly 100 years before Congress formally established the Navy Nurse Corps in 1908, women worked as nurses aboard Navy ships and in Navy hospitals. As early as the War of 1812, volunteers performed nursing duty in places that were often dangerous and required courage in the face of adversity. Only about 1,700 Navy nurses were serving at the start of World War II, but the ranks grew to over 11,000 by 1945. They were stationed at Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and other U.S. naval bases across the Pacific and were among the first to treat the wounded sailors during and after the December 7 attack. Nurses were not out of harm's way. One group of 11 nurses was taken prisoner by the Japanese when the island of Corregidor in the Philippines fell in May 1942 and were subjected to brutal treatment. Despite the fortitude demonstrated by women, resentments festered, and by May 1943, the slander campaign took hold, sometimes also called the whispering campaign or rumor campaign. Quote, "This onslaught of gossip, jokes, slander, and obscenity about the WAAC swept along the eastern seaboard in the spring of 1943, according to the Women's Army Corps by Maddie E. Treadwell, former WAC officer and historian in the Office of the Chief of Military History from 1947 to 1952. According to Treadwell, the slander reached a critical point on June 8, 1943, when a nationally syndicated column called Capital Stuff stated, quote, "Contraceptives and prophylactic equipment will be furnished to members of the WAAC, according to a super-secret agreement reached by high-ranking officers of the War Department and the WAAC chieftain, Mrs. William Pettus Hobby. It was a victory for the New Deal ladies. Mrs. Roosevelt wanted all the young ladies to have the same overseas rights as their brothers and fathers. Although the Army did indeed provide free prophylactics for men, this was not the case for the women."
The slander caused some collateral damage, but women pushed ahead, proving their mettle and steadily garnering support on the home front. Like the WAAC, the women who chose to enlist in the Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines were assigned to a wide variety of jobs. The Wave's 84,000 recruits worked in air traffic control, aerial navigation, and communications, while the SPAR's 11,000 women served as radio operators, ship's cooks, parachute riggers, and in clerical positions. The WAIR had some 19,000 women, over half of whom were assigned to clerical positions such as secretaries, stenographers, and telephone and telegraph operators. The Waves were not permitted to serve in foreign combat situations, such as on combat ships or aircraft. They were initially only located in the continental U.S. Later in the war, some of them served in U.S.-controlled territory and Hawaii. But during World War II, no Waves were sent into harm's way in other locations. Over the course of the entire war, there were more than 84,000 women who would serve as Navy Waves, to include 8,000 female officers. Regardless of their uniform styles, the new recruits were intent on proving themselves. WAC recruit Rachel Luella Summers McGee of Greensboro, North Carolina, was a teletype operator assigned to the Communications Center at Fort Knox, Kentucky from 1942 to 1943. In her 1999 interview at the Betty Carter Women Veterans Historical Project, WVHP, McGee recalled her basic training in Fort Des Moines. "It was rough being in that 20 below zero weather on the drill field. We were out there marching, and that ground was so slick with so much snow, when they would give us to the rear march, we'd fall flat on our face. That's how slick it was, because you had to snap to turn around, and you'd just fall. It was a sight. We were on display all the time because we were guinea pigs, but we wanted to show them what we could do. So they put us through everything possible, and we endured it." When the author spoke with 98-year-old former Waves Mary Jean Kilpatrick Watts, she clearly remembered, "I was working as a secretary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and would see the soldiers come and go at a social center in late 1943. Then in 44, things started to go sour in the Pacific. It was a very critical time, and so I thought about going into the Navy. And I did. I was inducted in May 1944. It was a very intense time of patriotism and worry."
The then 22-year-old from Ohio did her basic training at Hunter College in New York City, which the Navy had taken over, then spent a month at the Naval Air Station in Atlanta, Georgia, where she learned to operate and maintain link trainers. More than 500,000 U.S. pilots trained on this blue box flight simulator, which was vital in preparing pilots for instrument flying. At the U.S. Naval Air Station in Daytona Beach, Florida, Watts operated the link trainer, monitoring pilots and recording their flight paths during the simulations. "We were in the fighter direction unit," she recalled, "and there were 6 of us, and there were 6 of these big instruments. The pilots would come in groups of 6 for the training. I think many of them went right into battle. We learned how to maintain these funny-looking things and repair them if something broke down, like the wiring. We wore pants because we crawled underneath to fix them." Now, some 75 years later, Watts' memory about answering the call of duty remains strong. "We were losing a lot of people, a lot of men, a lot of ships in the Pacific. It was a pretty serious time. We had many shortages of food, but there was never a lot of complaining. Everybody was making a big effort. There was never such patriotism before or since that era. The demand for women continued to grow. I visited Coast Guard stations all over the country in the last 5 weeks, and the Coast Guard officers are calling for more spars. They like them, find them efficient, reported Lieutenant Commander Dorothy Stratton, Director of the Women's Reserve of the U.S. Coast Guard, in a September 18, 1943 St. Louis Globe-Democrat article headlined "Spar Enlistments Fluctuate with War." Chief says here, some 5 months earlier, on May 23, 1943, the Palm Beach Biltmore Hotel in Florida was ready for action and had already been leased and commissioned as a training station. More than 7,000 new spars were processed at the Palm Beach location, where they were trained primarily as yeomen and storekeepers, as well as parachute riggers and air control operators. Others were trained as cooks, bakers, radio men, radio technicians, and motor vehicle drivers. Coralie Coco Burson Davis from Pasadena, California, served in the Coast Guard spars from 1942 to 1946. In a 2001 WVHP interview, she recalled, "I went to enlist in the first group of women Marines and was too early for enlistment. I hadn't turned 21 yet, and my mother wouldn't sign the papers, so the Marine Corps said, try the Navy. But the WAVs had filled their quota, so they told her to try the Coast Guard. She was still too young, so they put her on a list, and when she turned 21, she contacted them and months later was headed to boot camp in February 1943. After boot camp, she was sent to the Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C., and was put to work in the transportation department typing out vouchers, which she described as deadly dull, but was able to get reassigned because of her theatrical experience. She eventually ended up auditioning for TARS and SPARS, a Coast Guard recruiting show, and was soon on a train headed for rehearsals at the Biltmore Hotel.
If you liked the first part of our story, don't forget to like the video and comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to watch the second part of the story.